Thank you all for being here on this midsummer day. This has been a busy summer for provincial news, and my office has been no exception. My biggest challenge in releasing this year's annual report is deciding which stories to highlight. There are so many. Many of you know my office because of our big investigations and reports, like the one I released here a month ago on excessive force in correctional institutions. But the truth is, most of the nearly 20,000 complaints that my staff and I received in the past year did not make the headlines. Instead, they made a difference in people's lives. When bureaucrats told a father he couldn't get identification for his baby daughter girl without a signature from his wife, who had died after giving birth, we were there to set things straight. When a mother became frantic over missing child support payment of $5,000, we helped find it in a battered package that got lost between government offices. Qu'il s'agisse de régler rapidement les choses, par exemple d'obtenir une réponse aux appels de quelqu'un, ou de s'attaquer à un problème complexe et persistant, comme les blessures de stress opérationnelles chez les policiers, mon personnel et moi travaillons pour trouver des solutions raisonnables. Whether it's a quick fix like getting someone's calls returned, or a long-standing complex issue like operational stress injury among police officers, my staff and I work to find sensible solutions. We help citizens get what they need from government and alert bureaucrats to problems before they get out of control. Sometimes we are quiet and unseen. Sometimes we have to make noise. We use our array of tools and expertise to make government run better. And we do it independently, away from the cut and thrust of politics. But government must do its part and follow through. It's one of the things to resolve a case quickly, which we often do without resorting to a formal investigation or report. But if the resolution is not followed with action, it's as hollow as a broken promise. This is why I'm taking the opportunity today to remind the government of some unfinished business. For example, 2 years ago, just after the House shut down for the last election, the Ministers of Transportation, now Premier, and the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care announced that they agreed with me that the non-emergency medical transportation industry in Ontario should be regulated. Our investigators had uncovered serious problems with maintenance, staff training, and infection control in these vehicles, which transport hundreds of thousands of Ontarians every year. Everyone agreed regulation was needed. The issue was resolved in the public interest, so there was no need for me to publish a report. 2 years later, the two ministers are now Premier and Deputy Premier, but regulation has not happened. I am hopeful that by reminding them today of this unfinished business using my horsefly role, as my report describes it, I can nudge them back into action on this important issue. Unless there is imminent action in regulating this industry, I will have no other option but to reopen the investigation. Similarly, it's been 3 years since the G20 summit in Toronto when police powers were expanded under the infamous Public Works Protection Act of 1939. After my report in December 2010, the government promised to replace the PWPA. Again, everybody agreed, but thanks to last year's prorogation, this is more unfinished business. And then there is the business I told you about last year at this time. The Premier just told me that he was prepared to open up part of the mush sector and finally start to catch Ontario up with the rest of Canada. Today, he is gone, but we are still dead last, the only province with no ombudsman oversight, of hospitals, children's aid societies, and soon thanks to a new law in New Brunswick, long-term care. This is more than just unfinished business. It is a missed opportunity. As I point out in my report, my colleagues in other provinces have helped their citizens with many issues in their respective sectors. Here we turned away 2,541 complaints, plus another about the Orange Air Ambulance service. It is also contrary to a groundswell of public support, not to mention logic. There is simply no rational reason to not allow their citizens in Ontario to complain to their ombudsman about these publicly funded bodies, particularly hospitals, long-term care homes, and children's aid societies, which touch the lives of so many vulnerable people. All other provinces allow ombudsman scrutiny of these areas, and all other Ontario organizations are subject to this scrutiny. Ce rapport présente les nombreux différents moyens par lesquels mon bureau contribue à améliorer le gouvernement, de l'intérieur comme de l'extérieur. J'espère qu'un jour, toutes nos capacités multifonctions et multitâches seront pleinement utilisées et que notre surveillance s'étendra à l'ensemble des activités gouvernementales. This report demonstrates the many ways my office helps improve government inside out. I'm hopeful that one day our multipurpose and multitasking abilities will be put to full use, overseeing all the business of government. Now, before I take your questions, I want to remind members of the public that are watching via live webcast that I will be doing a live chat at 2 p.m. on our website, and I look forward to hearing from them then. Thank you. Any questions?
On the PWPA, I mean, what's the exact reform that the government promised to put in place that they failed to follow through on?
To abolish this antiquated piece of legislation that led to massive compromise of civil liberties and replace it with a more practical, more modern piece of legislation which is constitutional, which will allow, for example, for places like courthouses to be secured, but without allowing the legislation to overreach and to result in this massive deprivation of civil rights that we saw during the G20.
They have tabled a new bill, it just hasn't gone through the system yet.
That's correct. You know, when you look at unfinished business, I would hope the PWPA is just a question of time before it passes. My greater concern is the non-emergency medical transportation. We conducted an investigation and we found at the time that 400,000 people are transported every day between hospitals or home and hospitals, long-term care and hospitals, and this is completely unregulated business. The coroner's been asking that it be regulated since 1995. This is a case where the wheels are literally falling off the bus. We have some of these vehicles, parts are flying off them. We have patients falling off gurneys. It's a question of time before there is a major catastrophe. And then we'll look back and say, why did the government not act? And I recently reminded the Premier of her commitment to act. I met the Minister of Transportation, who was not aware even of our report. So that certainly was not very encouraging. And so I really think this is an area where it is absolutely essential to move. We have a report that's ready to go. It's a question of updating the numbers, and we'll publish it.
Why do you feel they haven't acted on these?
Well, you know, it's ironic because this morning I was rereading the report in preparation for this press conference, and there's a passage in the report where I say that since 1995, the government has a history of panicking when the issue comes up, when there's a crash and someone gets injured or the issue or someone gets killed. And then as soon as the media fades, the government's interest stalls in changing the legislation. And I'm thinking they just did that to me, where I had a report ready to go, and because of the commitments, I did not publish it. And it's It's what we do in this business. You're not in I'm not in the business of publishing reports. I'm in the business of bringing change to government in the right way. And so when I saw there was this commitment from both ministers, I decided, well, let's not publish the report. But here we are, fast forward 2 years plus. And I know that in politics there was a prorogation and everything else, but when I'm speaking to the Minister of Transportation and he's not aware of the issue, I find that frightening.
Monsieur Marin, comment vous expliquez justement que 3 ans, par exemple, le gouvernement n'a pas changé certaines lois, comme la loi qui a entraîné des violations massives? Est-ce que c'est la politique, c'est la campagne, enfin bref, qu'est-ce qui les empêche de...
Écoutez, il y a plusieurs choses qui sont venues en ligne de compte. Tout d'abord, il y a la politique avec l'Assemblée législative qui a été proroguée. Il y a eu une incertitude politique et je comprends ce facteur-là, mais il y a quand même, je ne peux pas voir qu'une volonté politique en ce moment de procéder. Donc c'est pour ça aujourd'hui que je sonne la cloche et je fais le rappel au gouvernement qui se sont engagés à porter ces réformes et je m'attends qu'ils le fassent aussitôt que possible. One area that I do want to talk about as well, and I talked a little bit about it in my opening statement, is the MUSH sector. And if you look at the trend of ombudsmanship across Canada, you've had the Yukon Ombudsman's Office has been strengthened. The Alberta gave their ombudsman oversight of hospitals. Quebec gave their ombudsman oversight of hospitals. New Brunswick's moving to get oversight of long-term care to their ombudsman. And here in Ontario, we went from 2005, where the government almost abolished the office, to complete stagnation. And I think there's a point where it becomes a bit of an embarrassment. Ontario is a have-not province when it comes to accountability. We were very good for talking the talk, but not walking the talk. And every year we remind the government that it's great to talk about transparency and accountability and those tired cliches, but we need to start acting. And it's not a question, people always ask me, well, how much is it going to cost? Can we afford to give you oversight of long-term care in hospitals? Well, in the last few months, when there were questions raised from legislators about extending our office's oversight over hospitals, the government, by a stroke of a pen, created 100 new jobs, 100 new long-term care inspectors. When there was question about us overseeing hospitals, what did the government do? They came up with a piece of legislation in 2010 forcing every healthcare organizations, including hospitals, to create patient advocates. And there's 153 of them. So you see 253 jobs, internal jobs created whenever there's a cry for us to look into these areas. And, you know, if the government decides that hospitals need patient advocates, more power to them. You know, if they decide a hospital needs Walmart greeters, go ahead and get them. But I think the problem is when you muddy the water and say, oh, well, hospitals are accountable. Look, we have patient advocates. Well, this morning I had a quick look at various hospitals, and I didn't get a chance to do the 153 healthcare organizations, but the first 53 hospitals I found all had a patient advocate whose first job was to report on compliments back to the hospital. So an ombudsman is not there to report on compliments. So you can't confuse the two.
Can you talk a little bit about the ghost license plates?
That's very good. You know, I'm really concerned about this. Again, this is just another, when I talk about the role of the ombudsman as barometering the future, there's no real magic to it. There's no crystal ball. But I'll tell you, the ghost licenses issue gives me a lot of concern. These are infractions that are noted by the courts, convictions. Could be anything from drunk driving to whatever Highway Traffic Act offense. The offense is sent to the Ministry of Transportation so that it attaches to the person's record. Now, for whatever reason, if there's a misspell of the person's name, like I have 3 given names, which I never use. I just used Andre. But my full name is Joseph Andre Paul. Well, if I use a different name in my driver's license than the record they have in the ministry can't match up the conviction with your license. So we have right now, as we speak, hundreds of people that are driving that are not supposed to be driving. Some of them are drunks that should be off the streets. But they're driving because their driver's license is not marked as such. There were, last time we checked, 13,866 driver's licenses out of sync with drivers. And right now the ministry is reconciling them, matching them up, but it's a laborious and time-consuming thing. And every time the clock ticks, I'm concerned that there's a drunk driver out there that may be driving and posing a high risk to public safety.
Talk a bit more about this new investigation into daycares. Had you received complaints before the NDP sent you a letter? I noticed that you responded very quickly to that and launched the...
I don't believe we had any complaints, and we quickly decided to investigate this matter. I note that the Minister of Education and the Premier both expressed their horror. So I share their horrification, and I want to get to the bottom of this as quickly as possible. I've given my team 90 days to do so. I'm going to be starting this investigation basically from a blank canvas. And the first question I'm going to ask, without prejudging the case, of course, is why does it fall to the Ministry of Education to inspect unlicensed daycares? It seems at first blush to be an odd fit. We have a ministry called the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. We have other branches of government. There may be a perfectly logical question, but starting as an outsider, as an ombudsman looking in, I'm scratching my head over that one. And then we're going to look at all the policies and practices in place. We're going to look at whether there's a reasonable level of accountability provided by the ministry or by the government, whether it's from the right ministry, and we will go where the evidence brings us.
Monsieur Marin, même si c'est toujours le gouvernement libéral qui est au pouvoir, est-ce que vous avez le sentiment qu'avec la nouvelle première ministre, les chances de voir votre champ de compétences élargi, comment vous évaluez ça? Est-ce que c'est plus grand? Est-ce que ça pourrait changer pour qu'une fois, de façon définitive, vous ayez ce droit-là?
Je ne sais pas. Moi, j'entretiens de très bonnes relations avec la première ministre. Et puis, je vois qu'elle veut être reconnue comme étant une personne qui est progressiste, qui a l'équité en tête. Et donc, je vois que ça... d'étendre notre compétence au champ de moche, c'est quelque chose qui s'insère très bien dans ses priorités. Donc, on va voir. The question I was asked in French is whether or not the chances of having an increased jurisdiction over a mush is something more likely with the current current premier. And I don't know. We've had a meeting together. It was a very cordial meeting. Certainly, the Premier's mantra of fairness would be a perfect opening to create fairness for the sick, the elder, the children in need of care. Certainly, it fits within that agenda. So I always remain hopeful. And as I indicated earlier today in a published piece, outgoing Premier told me last year, a few days before the press conference, André, it's only a question of time, and I'm ready to start the process of giving you oversight of MUSH. So I'd like to see that proceed and follow the lead of other provinces, because right now, I think we're in a bit of an embarrassing position in Ontario. I mean, even the federal government have created in the last few years an Ombudsman for Veterans Affairs, which the government department opposed for decades. They've created an Ombudsman for victims of crime. So, you know, we have to wake up here in Ontario.
First off, I want to know how many licenses you have.
Just one.
Anyway, Isn't there, do you think there's a school of thought out there amongst the bureaucrats and some, as you said, government insiders that, André Marin is a bit of a megalomaniac and he wants to take over everything. He wants to investigate everything. Is there a school of thought about like that, you think?
Well, in 1978, if you go back to the Star Archives, the first Ombudsman of Ontario, Arthur Maloney, was called the exact same thing. There's always a risk that when you ask for more authority to do something, that you act proactively, that some people will take it the wrong way or will exploit it. When I became ombudsman in 2004, I was appointed, took office April 1st, 2005. The government was going to abolish the office. So at least they're not talking about abolishing us. But I'd like it to go further. I think it's time to strengthen the office and to make it more relevant. Right now, we oversee a bureaucrat at the Ministry of Health, dictate policy to hospitals, but we can't oversee how hospitals implement that policy that will directly affect the public, and it's all public funds. So, if anything, the exposure isn't with the bureaucrat in Toronto. The exposure would be in the MUSH sector. But they've been particularly good at PR, public relations, and lobbying, and so on, and that has made it harder to convince the powers that be to grant oversight to this area.
What do you think it says that it seems that they're so reluctant to expand your oversight to the healthcare system that, earlier this year when the NDP made a list of 7 or 8 demands, it was really the only one that the government, did not acquiesce in some way on. I mean, is there something, do you get some sense that there is some enormous fear in this government in having that kind of oversight in the healthcare sector?
I don't know. I'm going to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say that it's probably because those people in the MUSH sector don't really understand how we work. I had a hospital CEO say, well, does that mean we're going to have to fire all our patient advocates? And I'm like, no, you keep them. They can greet and pass on compliments and do other things you want them to do. But we were there for the systemic issues. And I think I think we need to start talking. And same thing with government. They need to realize that it's not all bad news. It will force the system to evolve. When we're looking at making the dollar go further in hospitals and other healthcare organizations, we need to find efficiencies. And why not, when you're coming from the outside, making recommendations to allow more bang for the buck. So I think, and I remain hopeful from year to year that there will be some movement. I know the Premier at one point, or the Deputy Premier said she wasn't closing the door on it. So we'll see.
Do you have any idea how many of those 13,000 out-of-sync licenses you're talking about are held by people that shouldn't be on the road?
I don't, and they don't. And right now they're methodically combing through all these files to try to vet them and try to reconcile them.
Is this just an error, or are people obtaining them through nefarious means?
No, it's not. It's one of those bureaucratic snafus. The system was just not designed to do a very efficient and effective job.
But given that the driving license
You
is such a...
you mentioned that the people in the MUSH sector was it people in the MUSH sector you said that had been doing a good job of lobbying?
Yes.
So are they hiring people to lobby the government to disallow oversight? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, I don't have any insider information like that, but I say every time this issue comes up, the Ontario Hospital Association, for example, are very vocal in their opposition. And, this is a very powerful group. And I think they have weight. And so, it'd be different if the MUSH sector was saying, come on in. If everybody agreed, it wouldn't be as hard.
The driver's license, though, is a critical piece of identification, considered a very secure piece of identification. Does this raise issues about why someone might have licenses in different names? There might be other sort of fraud reasons that they might do something like this?
I think it's simply because people tend to not use all their names, and so the system, if you look at your own wallet, I'm sure you have various ID that has, various given names, and not everybody uses all their names. I'm certainly one of them that doesn't. And the government records are overwhelmed with all the different names out there, and they're not keeping track of who's who.
All these delays with the G20 law, the medical transfers, and on, how much of that do you think can be attributed to the fact that they're in a minority government and it's very difficult to pass legislation?
You know, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it that there have been difficult political times the last couple of years. But nonetheless, when I meet with the Minister of Transportation and he's not aware of the issue of non-emergency medical transportation, that's a cause of concern. It tells me that it's fallen off the radar. And so it's not as if these cases were on the radar. The Public Works Protection Act, for example, is on the radar. That one doesn't concern me as much. I still would like to see it fixed because we have unconstitutional law that is in effect in Ontario right now. But the non-emergency medical transportation, 400,000 are happening every year, probably closer to 500,000 now. And you're safer to take a taxi from your home to the hospital than to take one of these vehicles that are often beaters. They're ambulances that are turned into beaters. And you hire them at great cost to ferry you. And just because the 19-year-old drivers have uniforms and they drive cars that look like ambulances, you think that it's official and you're safe, and you're not.
In the flesh sector, the hospitals and the OHA actively lobbying. Can it come down to the fact that they're really afraid that what you'll dig out will cut the good times for them? I mean, because the amount of money that's poured into hospitals and the health sector has just increased obscenely over the last couple of years.
I've spoken with several hospital CEOs and officials in the last few months to gauge from them what their reaction is on a one-on-one basis towards our involvement in overseeing hospitals. And they often have many gripes against the Ministry of Health long-term care. And when I hear them expressing them about being over-regulated or the people in Toronto don't know how hospitals are run and this kind of thing, I can say, hey, well, you haven't realized that an ombudsman is everyone's ombudsman. If your issue is in Toronto, maybe it's an issue we can help you with if we oversaw your area. So that's why I think that these organizations have to back away from the reflex of opposing oversight and recognizing it as a tool to advance their decision making and to help them run their hospitals in a more efficient way. Thank you.